I recently picked up this small cigar box for $1 at a local thrift store and transformed it into a piece of assemblage art. Here's a short before video of the box, and here it is after. I recorded the entire process, which clocked in at just under 16 hours of video, and today I'll walk you through the whole thing, edited down to just under 2 hours. Let's get back to the original box. As I mentioned, the box is rather small, measuring less than 6 inches tall and just over 4 inches wide. This cigar box is a bit unusual in that it features a large piece of glass permanently mounted in the top so that you can see the contents of the box. I'm not sure if this is a great characteristic for a cigar box / humidor, but it was perfect for me in the plans I had for transforming it. The first step was to do some cleaning. I also wanted to pick at the sticker on the side to make it a little bit less of a clean tear where the box opens. Okay, we'll remove the price sticker from the back. It says $2, but they were running a half off sale, so it was actually just $1. And the major project for the front of the box was removing this large sticker from the glass completely. Unfortunately, the sticker didn't come off too cleanly, and it was a real bugger to get the rest of it off. One of my preferred ways to remove sticker residue is by using packing tape to peel it off. Almost sort of like a lint roller. But there was so much and it was so persistent, it took quite a bit of effort to get this completely off. I actually had to wind up using a small razor blade to finish the job. Now the next step is to remove part of the sticker on the lower right of the box. This step is pretty important because the alterations I make and the way that it looks is going to be the same all the way until the end. I was hoping to make it look naturally worn to a certain degree, and then we sort of replicate that with the sticker in the upper left. I like the name Habanos, and I kind of like the font and the colors, so I wanted to leave that where it was readable, but still where it looked a bit weathered. Okay, the first half of the video is going to be making alterations to the top of the box, or the lid, and we're going to start by painting the inside white. I printed out this rectangle the same size as the piece of glass so I could lay this piece of paper in to catch the excess paint. And then I just took this Glidden Fundamentals white house paint, it's matte, and a foam brush and started painting. When I first got paint on the hinges, I was a little worried, but then I realized that eventually I was going to want it to look a little sloppy anyways. So I stopped worrying and just smudged it a bit. And here I addressed some excess glue and wood left at the corners where the box was assembled. This is because I'm going to cut pieces to fit inside the box, and this excess material makes it a little difficult to make the fit perfect. All right, we'll paint the inside rim here. And this is where the paper helps keep the paint from getting on the glass. It wouldn't be a big deal because I could just scrape the paint off or maybe even leave some if I wanted, but I just wanted to avoid getting a whole lot of paint on the glass at this point. All right, the next step is I'm going to be cutting out some of these wood pieces that were pre-painted. I had painted those for a previous project in a similar white paint. I'm going to cut them down to fit the frame, and then you'll see what we do next. I actually filmed the cutting process. That took place in my garage, but the footage didn't turn out too great. It didn't really match, so I just left that out. So you can just see the cut pieces here. I noticed that there was a slight bulge where the latch had a nail or something that was poking through the back, so I had to do an indentation on this piece of wood so it would sit flush against the side. Yeah, just like that. And for the corner pieces, I just cut slices of wood cord around. The next step is painting the actual stars onto the glass itself. And for that, I needed to use a star map as a guide. I often use star maps in my work, and this Peterson Field Guide Stars and Planets is my Bible for star maps. And what I did here is I found the star map that I wanted to use, which turned out to be this larger map that includes the Draco constellation. I just took a black and white photo of the star map, and then I inversed the black and the white. Next, I isolated the part of the star map that I wanted to use in the exact same proportions as a piece of glass in the front of the box. I then cut away the rest of the star map, and I flipped it because it's on the back side of the glass and needs to be reversed. I printed the star map out to the same size as a piece of glass and simply cut it out with scissors. Next, I removed the wooden pieces, and I made sure to label them so I wouldn't forget where they went. I give the glass a little bit of a cleaning, and then I attach the star map to the outside using blue painter's tape. And that'll give me the guide that I need to paint the stars on the reverse side of the glass, as you can see here. I used the same white Glidden house paint for the stars. I just separated a little bit into a small container. To paint the stars, I just used a toothpick dipped in the paint. This allowed me to get accurate placement and also allowed me some variance on the size of the drop to get it to match the size of the star. One thing I didn't anticipate is because of the lighting, once I painted a star, it created a shadow which looked almost exactly like the stars on the printout. This was a little confusing at first, but eventually I learned that once I painted the star to just ignore what was underneath it. Eventually here I'll speed it up. And I also removed the parts where I was dipping the toothpick into the paint because it was looking a little herky-jerky. So it creates the illusion of the toothpick seemingly having infinite paint here. Once I reached the end of matching up the stars, I realized that there were stars that I couldn't see through the stickers. So I had to get another printout of the star map and just match it up by eyesight. Alright, that's all done. So now while that's drying, we're going to paint some pieces that we're going to be using, including these tiny little sliced dowels. You'll see what I use those for in a little bit. We paint all of the quarter round pieces with the first coat. And then the tricky part of trying to paint all these teeny tiny little pieces. Put a second coat on these little corner pieces. Okay, now that we've got the stars painted, I'm going to build the little dividers that you see in the star map. There's straight and curved lines. I'm going to make those out of wire. Those are going to mount into these wooden pieces on the side. And so what I need to do is mark the wooden pieces where I'm going to drill holes for the wires to go into. And that includes the corner pieces. As you notice the lines in the background, some of them enter into the corner pieces. Now that I have the corner pieces marked where I'm going to drill them, I have to label them too because they have to go back exactly where they were. Okay, now I'm going to do some drilling. Unfortunately, the drill got in the way on some of it. Before I drill, I have a small nail that I go in and make an indentation so that the drill bit will stay true. notice on this hole, I cut it at an angle because I knew that that wire was going to be going in at a pretty sharp angle. Okay, reassembly number 2. And now it's time to cut the wires to fit. We've got 2 different gauges of wire. We've got a really thick wire for the curved lines and the straight lines that make sort of a graph, a spherical graph of the night sky. And then I've got some thinner wire to do the lines in the actual constellation in between the stars. But we're starting with the thick wire. We've got the straight ones here. This is the wire that goes in at an angle on that piece on the left. And now we're going to do the curved wires to match. I had to kind of do that by hand. I'm going to give it a little test run here just to make sure that the wires fit in the holes okay and it matches up the way that it should. That one turned out to be a little bit too long. All right, the straight pieces look pretty good. Now let's check on the curved pieces. Now I'm marking the wood pieces again because I'm going to have to drill some additional holes for the wires from the constellation. And for this one I used a much smaller drill bit. If you can tell from the holes, I've got the larger holes with the larger wires on sort of one side of the wood, and then a little bit lower is where I put the thinner wires. So if you're looking at it from the front, the constellation wires are going to be in the front, and then behind them will be the larger wires. And here I had to cut a notch because the wire wasn't going to actually go in. It was just going to kind of run along for a little bit. And now for the much thinner constellation wires and trying to get those to match up. Almost there. Perfect. Well, perfecter. The bottom part I'm going to have to do in 2 separate pieces. One long one that winds multiple times, and then a shorter piece with just one bend in it. And this one, I'm actually not going to cut it where it meets the bottom. I'm just going to run it along that bottom piece of wood. If you saw I cut a notch in that piece, you can see it in the bottom left of the screen here. where I'm just going to tuck the wire down into that slot. So hopefully it'll sort of visually disappear and then come back out, and you won't be able to tell. I mean, you will, but you won't. And I think it'll be kind of a fun element to be able to see that that's how it was done. It looks like two separate constellations, but these are actually both part of Draco. They meet up outside of where I've cropped it here. All right, we got that piece pretty good. That just leaves us one tiny piece left with a single bend in it. Okay, that looks pretty good. Oh, one more little cut. I hope one more little cut. Two little cuts. And we're good. Okay, this next step is pretty tricky, but also pretty neat. The wires for the constellations had to be held in place, and that couldn't be done like the larger wires, just from where they contacted the wood on the outside. So what I had to do, if you remember those tiny little pieces that I've painted, is that those are going to be placed on the larger stars in the constellation, and they're going to be attached with paint to where the stars are, and then the wires will rest on top of those like tiny little columns. So I'll start with adding a bit of wet paint to the stars, and then we will attach these tiny little columns on top of the stars. You won't be able to see it too well from the front, which is great. You'll just be able to see the lines for the constellation, but you'll certainly be able to see them from behind, which I think is going to look pretty cool. There was likely a more secure way to attach them than just using the paint, but they aren't really under a lot of stress holding those really thin wires, so I wasn't too worried about it. Okay, now we're going to paint all the wires, not stressing at all about getting full coverage or making them look perfect. Actually, the more flawed they look, the better. Yep, we even painted the tiny little constellation wires. And we go in and paint the back of the frame pieces as well, and give another coat on the front. As an added visual element, I'm going to add a small drop of paint to each of the corner pieces right in the center. And I'm going to make it really thick so that the little white dot will stand out from the front. I gave that a long amount of time to dry. Now I'm going to make sure none of the pieces are still attached to the little skewers. I went in and cleaned out some of the paint from the holes where the little wires go into. And next up, we're actually going to assemble the star map. Some of the wires will need to be inserted before I glue the wood pieces in, and then some of it will be sort of assembled once the wood pieces are already in place. I'm checking what I wrote, and I'm going to go ahead and line up all of the corner pieces where they go over here on the right. So it'll be easy to just put them in when I'm ready. There's that angle piece with the hole cut at an angle. And I actually goofed up here. I put this larger wire into the very small hole where the constellation wire was supposed to go. And it gave me problems making it fit because the hole was too small. And then later on, you'll see that it didn't line up. And that's when I realized I'd gotten it wrong and was able to fix it. All right, we'll just glue this in place with some glue. Make sure it's snug. And next we're going to try to do the side pieces the same way. And I say try because, like I mentioned before, I did a dum-dum. And that's where I realized, oh, okay, well that makes so much more sense. And it fits so much better. Okay. Now we're going to start with the corner pieces. And I put little spacers in there because I didn't want them flush against the glass. I forget why, but this particular corner was giving me all kinds of problems lining up correctly. But eventually I got it where I wanted. And the straight lines were actually a little bit below the curved lines, so I had to kind of go in back behind them in order to get this piece in. And it's super snug. All right, I think that's all of the larger pieces of wire in place. Now we can get to the other corner and then start working in the smaller constellation wires. Before I get to the constellation wires, I'm actually going to do some touch-up painting. Where the corners meet the wood, and then also some of the paint came off, which is fine, but in certain places it was a little bit too much and I didn't want so much of the silver coming through, so I also touched up the wires a bit. I wanted the inside frame pieces to look as though they were painted at the same time as the outside. The next step wasn't part of the original plan, but once I got to this stage and looked at it, I realized that the pieces that are on the inside, the wooden pieces in between the corners, just needed a little bit more. And so what I decided to do was to add these really thin strips of wood on either side of the wires, and then, some tiny pieces in between to sort of break it up. This turned out to be a lot more work than I thought, and it took quite a bit of time. It was also done at a weird angle, so unfortunately sometimes it's going to be a little bit difficult to see, but I did the best that I could. This first example goes pretty slow, but that's just because I wanted you to see the work that went into each of these little wooden strips. I actually attached them just using the paint. You can see here as I brush it along, using it almost as glue. And then I would also add some paint to the little strip itself. And just try to position it in there and add a little more paint. And you'll see that small drill hole, that's where one of the constellation wires is going to go. And so I had to break up the little wooden strip so that wire would still go in there. And here I did some measurements because I wanted to add some tiny little horizontal elements, and I wanted them to be spaced out properly. These are just sort of like tiny little cross beams or something. It felt like it needed visually, and also it sort of felt right architecturally to add these in. All right, now we'll rotate around and we'll do all of the different sides. Once again, we have to leave space for all of the tiny little holes for the constellation wires. You can see here pretty clearly a couple of the columns that the constellation wires are going to eventually sit on. This angle makes them much easier to see. You can sort of see how they're going to elevate the wire just a little bit from the glass. And you can see here that notch that I cut, it's just a big groove in the wood. And that's where the wire is going to fit into that and create the illusion of that constellation wire sort of disappearing and reappearing out from the other side. Hopefully. Now at the top and the bottom, I wanted the same sort of crossbar in there, but it needed to be in the dead center as opposed to broken up into thirds. All right, with that part done, it's time to move on to the constellation pieces. We'll get zoomed in here a little bit. You can't really tell, but the end pieces of the wire are going into the wood on either side. And then it's just resting on those tiny little pegs, those little columns that I mentioned. And here I cheated maybe just a little bit. I got some super glue and I applied those just so the bond is a little tighter. And then I'll go back in later and just dabble some paint on top, just so I don't get that glue look, that glossy glue look. You can see here where the little wires goes into that slot in the wood at the bottom. But it becomes clear to me pretty quickly that my wire was off. The measurements were off. And I wasn't going to be able to get it to work. So I had to do some extra pinching at the bottom to kind of shorten it a bit. It was so tricky working with the constellation wires because they were underneath the larger wires. And actually, when I was working on this one, I popped one of the pegs off. If you remember, I said I attached them to the glass just by using white house paint. And I may have jinxed myself when I said that there wasn't much pressure on them. I didn't realize that during the construction process, I might bump it. And sure enough, it just popped right off. So I applied it again and gave it a few minutes to dry, and then I was able to line up and attach the constellation wire. And once again, I used a little bit of super glue on the very top. And so I feel like even if the little pegs, maybe for whatever reason, come loose from the glass, they're actually going to be held in place by the wire because they're super glued to the wire, and the wires on either end are attached to the wood, and they're in a set shape. That's just theoretical, but I don't think there's going to be any issue with the little pegs popping off the glass again. All right, a little bit more touch up, especially as I mentioned, covering up any sign of the super glue, and then I'll paint over where the little wire goes into the wood there at the bottom. And let's do a reveal of the finished star map from the front. Wow, it looks amazing. I was so impressed. I thought it turned out great. And here we can take a look on the inside, and you can sort of see like the three-dimensionality of the star map. Now this next step, I'm actually going to treat the outside of the box to give it a much more weathered look. And the way that I'm going to do that might surprise you a bit. The first step is to apply some polyurethane. And I just use a torn piece of cardboard to do that with. I hate cleaning up polyurethane and I hate ruining brushes, so this works just fine. Okay, so we cover it with a relatively thick coat of polyurethane. And once we get done with that, we set fire to it. Yep. You probably noticed that the background has changed, and that's because I stepped outside for this process in order to have proper ventilation. Now, the only problem with being outside and with proper ventilation is that it was an incredibly windy day, and that caused a few problems keeping the fire lit, but I was able to work around it. All right, we're going to coat the other side here, not worrying too much about it seeping down in between or anything. And we'll light it up again. That was a great burn there. I love how the edges looked a little bit charred as well. All right, we'll flip it around to the bottom, and we're going to repeat the process on all four sides. You can see the wind kicking in there a little bit, and then much more. It just blew it out completely. In addition to some slight discoloration, by setting it on fire, it gives it a bit of a texture. Polyurethane by default dries very smooth and flat, so this prevents that from happening and gives it a wonderful textured, weathered look. You'll see it when I show off the finished product. You can tell that was probably the first burn so far where there was literally no wind, so you can see how it would sort of normally do. Because the one side was a little bit more burnt than the other, I decided to try to match it a little bit, and that turned out pretty well. I assumed that this process would leave quite a bit of charring on the stickers that were left, but they didn't actually burn very much. In the end, I didn't really mind at all. It was kind of cool having the stickers look really fresh over top of the textured, worn box itself. I actually tried to block the wind here. And you'll see, I think from here on out, it remains so consistently windy that I was oftentimes trying to block it. That was a really nice burn. And then this one turned out really good too. Ooh, look at that. That's so good. I love how it caught back over to the other side. where it didn't burn before. Okay, now we're going to do the front, which is a little bit trickier. It's a lot thinner, the little pieces that you have to do, and the wind just kept being crazy, so it was really problematic. I think I got a couple of really long, nice burns, but otherwise it was just a lot of like splotchy burns. I did 2 sides at once here, or tried to anyways. But yeah, it was a lot of sort of that right there. It would just burn for a little bit in a tiny little spot and then just blow out. That was really good. In the future, I'm going to have to figure out a way to be outside and then also block the wind completely while still maintaining proper ventilation. Just one last side here, the back side. Still lots of wind problems. I recentered it a bit here for this last little bit. Come on, little flame. You can make it. Oh no. Almost. All right, and that's what it looks like after. Let me remove this little spacer here. And then I'll give you a look all around the outside. And this was, I think I let it dry overnight, maybe 24 hours, and it was okay to handle. And that wraps up the first part, which is essentially completing the top of the box. And in part 2 of the video, we're going to move on to the bottom or the right side of the box as well as the back. So be sure to check out that video.